My name is Emily Thompson. I am 35 years old. I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. For most of my life, I have been a convinced atheist. And when I say convinced, I mean absolutely certain that there is no God. Nothing that happened around me made me doubt that, not even the faith of the people I loved. I was a philosophy professor at a respected university here in Seattle. And yes, I loved deconstructing religious arguments. I felt powerful every time I put a devout student against the wall with questions that seemed unanswerable. But what no one knew is that behind my shield of logic and skepticism, there was a deep pain, a wound that I was never able to heal. I grew up in a Christian home. My father was the pastor of a small Baptist church. My mother was the heart of that home. Sweet, devoted, she prayed for me every night, even when I began to stray from the faith. But when I was 16, she died in a brutal way, a car accident on Christmas Eve. And the worst part, she was on her way to church to organize a community dinner. That day, something inside me snapped. I locked myself in silence and then, in anger. How could God allow someone so good to be ripped away like that? While everyone was saying it was God's will, I was screaming inside, then I don't want anything to do with this God. Little by little, I left the church. And over time, I built a wall made of philosophy, science, sarcasm, and a lot of fear, afraid to allow myself to feel, afraid to admit that even after everything I still wanted to believe. And it was with this hardened, cold heart that I walked through life for almost 2 decades, until the day everything fell apart. What comes after that is what no one ever expects. Because I, the woman who mocked faith, who ridiculed any idea of life after death, I died. And I came back with something that still makes me cry just remembering it. It was a Tuesday. I was in the university auditorium in the middle of a lecture on rationalism and morality without religion. This was my territory. I felt right at home challenging the logic of spiritual beliefs. But in the middle of a sentence, something strange happened. My words began to slur. My vision blurred. A ringing sound filled my ears, and suddenly everything went black. I woke up on a stretcher with bright lights shining in my face and the sound of hurried footsteps and voices all around me. I was in the hospital. The doctor, a serious man named Dr. Mitchell, explained that I had had a seizure. After some tests, what seemed impossible came to light. I had a brain aneurysm. My first reaction? Rationalize. Okay, it's a physical, scientific problem. Let's solve it with surgery, and that's it. But inside, I was in a panic. For the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't control with logic, the fear of death. Dr. Mitchell explained that the surgery needed to be done urgently. There were no guarantees. He was clear. You may not wake up. I went back to the room with that sentence hammering in my mind. You might not wake up. Atheists often say that they are not afraid of death because they believe it is just the end, nothingness. I used to say that too, until that day. But there, lying in that cold room, alone, facing the real possibility of dying, I realized how desperate nothing can be. And for the first time in decades, I spoke to God. With a choked voice, almost like a whisper, I said, "If anyone out there hears me, show me that I'm wrong. Just show me." And then, silence. A deafening silence. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. That night, I tried to sleep, not knowing that I was about to cross the line between life and death, and that what I would see on the other side would change everything. I've never been afraid of being alone. I've always thought of solitude as a kind of freedom. But that night, in room 402 at Seattle General Hospital, I discovered that solitude can be something else. A mirror. Everything was silent. Just the sound of heart monitors and distant footsteps in the hallway. The world outside went on. Cars, people, lives happening. And I was there, with a restless soul. I lay on my side, curled up like a child. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. My mother smiling, my father's face at the funeral, students applauding me, and emptiness, a dark hole waiting for me. I tried to read. I tried to listen to music. I tried to rationalize, as I always did. Thousands go through surgeries like this every day. It's going to be okay. But I knew it was just a facade. Around 3 a.m, I broke down. I started crying, quietly, trying not to draw attention. It wasn't just fear of dying. It was the anguish of having lived, without meaning, a life full of knowledge, but empty of faith, of true love, of something greater than myself. It was at that moment that I looked up at the dark ceiling of the room, and with a choked voice, I spoke again. If you exist, if you're really there, please find me. Show me that I'm not alone. I didn't expect an answer. In fact, I expected the same silence I'd heard for years, but there was something different about that moment. A presence. I can't explain it. It was as if someone was there, listening to me. There was no voice, no visions, just a very subtle feeling that I had been heard. I fell asleep shortly after, not with peace, but with something new, hope, fragile, timid, but real. And then it was dawn. The nurses came to prepare me. Dr. Mitchell smiled, trying to hide the tension. I was wheeled into the operating room. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia was the white ceiling and cold lights. And then, everything went black. But what happened after that, it wasn't a blackout. It was the beginning of the most real thing I have ever experienced. I remember the anesthesia rising up my arm, a strange sensation, like I was moving away from my own body. The lights in the operating room were getting farther away, like I was sinking into a very dark lake. Then, nothing, or rather, it went beyond nothing. Suddenly, I was somewhere else, but not a place in the usual sense. It was a formless, timeless space. There was no ground, no sky. There was no sound, just absence, an absolute void. And for some reason, I knew I was dead. There was no pain, no panic, just a deep silence and a feeling impossible to describe. It was like being trapped between two worlds, conscious, but without a body. I wanted to scream, but I had no voice. I wanted to run, but I had no legs. And yet, I was there. Somewhere in the distance, which wasn't exactly distance, I noticed movement, a presence. It was as if something was approaching, or I was being drawn towards something. Meanwhile, in the hospital, I was technically dead. Dr. Mitchell later told me, I went into cardiac arrest during surgery. My heart stopped for exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes of clinical death. They used a defibrillator, injections, everything. And they almost gave up. But I didn't know it at the time. All I felt was the most intense reality I've ever experienced. Time seemed to have ceased to exist. Those 7 minutes there seemed like an eternity. And it was there, at the height of emptiness, that I felt something changing. A light began to emerge, slow, warm, soft, but with an indescribable presence. And then I saw it, a figure approaching, not walking, but manifesting. Someone I never expected to see, someone I had steadfastly denied my entire life, Jesus. I don't know how long I stood there, floating in that nameless space between nothing and everything. The silence was absolute, and for a moment I asked myself, is this it? Is this where it all ends? But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something my mind was not prepared to comprehend. The light forming in the distance was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just brightness. It was consciousness. It was as if she knew me, as if she was waiting for me. And then the figure appeared, not with words, but with presence. It was him, Jesus. I did not see him with my eyes. I perceived him with my soul. No painting, no sermon, no idea I had about him was enough to describe what I felt. He was absolute peace, and at the same time, absolute truth. I was paralyzed, not with fear, but with a respect so deep that it seemed to disintegrate me inside. He didn't say a word, but I understood everything. At that moment, all the emptiness I had been carrying for years was revealed before him, and he just looked at me with a love that doesn't judge, with a compassion that heals without touching. And here, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt, even for a second, that something bigger is calling you? If so, comment below. Share it with me. It doesn't matter if it was a dream, an intuition, or a moment of silence like mine. Maybe you felt it too. Because in that void, in the midst of absolute silence, I discovered the most real presence of my entire life. And there was still much more to come. His presence. It was as if my entire body, or what was left of it, was vibrating at a frequency I had never known before. I wasn't just seeing Jesus. I was being seen. Seen in a way that had never happened in my entire life. It wasn't like standing before a man. It was like standing before the origin of everything. He didn't have a physical appearance like we're used to. He wasn't like in paintings or movies. He was light, but a light with identity, with essence, with soul. And that light passed through me. It revealed me. Everything I had hidden from myself for decades was laid out there. And yet, he didn't look away. I expected judgment, a gesture of disapproval, "You have denied my name all your life." But what I got was different. It was a love so pure, so unconditional, that it completely disarmed me. In his presence, I realized the lie I had been living. The armor of arrogance I had worn for so many years was actually a disguise for the pain of the 16-year-old girl who had lost her mother and never allowed herself to feel it again. And he knew it. I knew everything. He did not speak with words, but with truth. A truth that went straight to the heart, without needing an explanation. I saw my life flash before me, as if scenes were projected onto a field of living energy. Every choice, every word that hurt, every silence that hurt someone. And yet, he remained there. But the most impressive thing wasn't seeing what I did. It was feeling what others felt. It was like I was inside every person I hurt. I felt their pain. And at the same time, his forgiveness reached me. I fell to my knees. Or at least, that's what my soul did. There was no more resistance. There was no more reason, argument, logic. Just a silent request. Forgive me for everything. And he came near, not harshly, but tenderly. The light around him intensified. And when it touched my consciousness, I felt as if I was being washed from within. A cleansing, a new beginning. I started crying. Tears I didn't even know existed. It was as if all the pain, all the coldness, all the fear were being ripped away. And for the first time since I lost my mother, I felt peace, real peace. The kind that we don't find in any book, in any speech, in any theory. That peace that only those who have been before Jesus know. And then, he said something, not with my mouth, but inside me. "You're not ready. It's not time yet." Before I could ask what that meant, everything started to fall apart. The field of light dissolving, the feeling of gravity returning, a sudden pull, and then darkness. But it wasn't the end. It was my return. I don't know if you've ever had the feeling of seeing your entire life flash before your eyes. Not as loose memories, but as a movie, where each scene has sound, color, smell, and feeling. Because that's exactly what happened there. In his presence, I not only we my life, USA relive. But there was one detail that made everything even more intense. I wasn't just seeing it from my point of view. I saw through the eyes of the people who crossed my path. The first scene that came to mind was the day my mother died. I saw myself young, desperate, broken inside. But I also saw her, my mother, praying in the car, minutes before the accident. She prayed for me. Even though she was dying, she thought of me. The pain came back like a punch to the stomach. But this time, it didn't destroy me. Because Jesus was there, making me feel like I was never alone in that suffering. The next scene was in college, an argument with a Christian classmate. I humiliated her in public with arguments, sarcasm, arrogance. At the time, I thought I had won. But there, I saw her face crying alone in the bathroom. I felt the shame she felt, the pain of having her faith ridiculed by someone she respected. And once again, his love did not condemn me. It just showed me. And I understood. Many other scenes followed. People I hurt with harsh words. Students who needed compassion and I offered coldness. Friends who begged for support and I ignored them with speeches about self-sufficiency. But I also saw little things that I had never appreciated. A heartfelt hug I gave to a grieving student. An encouraging note I wrote to a department colleague. The way my smile changed a tired nurse's day. Every gesture, every word, Every choice, everything counted. Everything left a mark. And in the midst of all this, Jesus remained by my side. He didn't accuse me. He just made me see. And seeing the truth hurt more than any punishment. I cried. A lot. But they were not tears of despair. They were of regret, of shame, and of liberation. Because every tear that fell seemed to make room for something new inside me. Something I had never felt before. Purpose. Life, my life, was not random. Every person I crossed paths with, every choice I made, it was all part of something bigger. And then, at the height of this revelation, I felt it was time to go back. The movie of my life had ended, but the script was just beginning to be rewritten. Everything started to change when he looked at me again, with that look that pierced me completely. Jesus didn't say anything, but I understood. It was time to go back. My heart, or whatever was beating inside me in that state, wanted to stay. I wanted to stay there forever, in that presence that healed just by existing. But he approached, and with a lightness almost impossible to describe, he extended his hand. He didn't touch my body, because I didn't have a body. It touched my essence. And in that touch, a message invaded my being. It's not your time yet. It was as if eternity itself was returning me to time. At the same time, I felt a tug, strong, like being sucked into an invisible whirlpool, like falling at high speed off a cliff, but without the fear of falling. Everything around me dissolved into particles of light. His presence began to move away, and for the first time, I missed something that was still happening. So, pain, artificial lights, screams, confusion. I woke up with an unbearable feeling in my chest, as if someone had set me on fire. Then I heard someone yell, "She's back! We have a heartbeat!" I opened my eyes for a second. Dr. Mitchell's face appeared, relieved, breathless. Nurses running, monitors beeping. But inside me, a silence, a sacred silence. I was alive, but it wasn't the same anymore. The next few days were strange. My body was weak, my mind was confused. I could barely talk about what had happened. How do I tell doctors and nurses, rational people, like I have always been, that I was with Jesus? And yet, something inside me was burning. It wasn't a fever, it was an emergency. I knew I had to remember every detail, that experience wasn't just for me. It was meant to be shared, a testimony. I started writing everything down in an old notebook I found in the room. Words, images, sensations. And there, with his eyes still swollen, with his body fragile, with his heart broken and new at the same time, I perceived death did not defeat me, and the life that awaited me would no longer be guided by logic, but by faith. The days in the hospital passed slowly. The body was still in shock, recovering from the surgery and cardiac arrest. But what hurt the most wasn't physical. It was as if I had lived another reality, more intense, more true, and now I was back in an opaque, muffled, artificial world. The fluorescent lights irritated me. The doctor's trivial conversations seemed distant to me, and most of all, I couldn't get his face out of my mind. Jesus. Until then, this name was just an idea, a character from old books, a theological concept. Now, he was the person who knew me better than I knew myself, and that he had forgiven me with a simple look. For the first week, no one knew about my experience. I could barely get the words out. It just said, it was weird. I dreamed about some things. But inside, it was a war. The skepticism that had defined me my entire life was still trying to rear its head. It was just a hallucination, I told myself. Your brain made it all up, but there was something I couldn't ignore, the peace that remained. Even with the pain, even with the doubts, there was a calm deep within my soul that I had never felt before. And what's more, I started to feel thirsty, not for water, thirst for something I had avoided for decades, thirst for truth, thirst to know the one who looked me in the eyes and did not condemn me. A nurse named Grace, ironically Grace in English, noticed my silence. One night, when she brought the medicines, she asked me with a gentle smile, "Do you believe in miracles?" I remained silent, but my eyes filled with tears. She didn't insist. She just left a small Bible with a light blue cover on my bedside table. And he said, "When you are ready, he will show you the answers." That morning, I opened the book for the first time in over 20 years. I started with the Gospel of John. And right in the first few lines, something struck me. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I felt a shiver. It was as if it had been written for me. In the following days, I began to read every day, in secret. I didn't want the doctors or colleagues to know. It was as if I was still ashamed to admit that something inside me had changed. But what I didn't know is that this change was just beginning. I was discharged from the hospital almost a month later. The doctors said my recovery had been exceptional, almost unbelievable. But they didn't know the most extraordinary part. My soul was also recovering. Coming home was like entering a place that no longer suited me. Everything was the same. My books, my awards, my notes. But I was no longer the same woman who left there. I turned on the computer, read emails, tried to write an article. Nothing made sense. What had once been my passion, arguing, proving theses, challenging beliefs, now felt empty, as if I were trying to speak another language with a new soul. Still, I went back to university. I was greeted with hugs, applause, and praise. They said my return was a medical miracle, and I smiled silently, knowing that the miracle went far beyond the physical. I sat down in front of the class, and for the first time, I didn't feel like talking about Nietzsche or Dawkins. I looked into the students' eyes and saw what I had ignored before. People with stories, pain, searches. I talked about purpose, about what it means to be truly alive. I used neutral words because I didn't feel ready to expose everything yet, but something in me guided every sentence. And when I finished, several students stayed. They hugged me. They asked if they could talk after class. Something was happening. I started receiving messages from former students. Some said they had never felt so seen in the classroom. Others just wanted to hear my voice, as if they were waiting for something beyond matter. And that's when I understood. My mission was no longer to debate ideas. It was touching hearts. Over the next few weeks, I began quietly attending a small church outside of Seattle. I sat in the back. I cried in almost every service. And in silence, I listened. I wasn't looking for intellectual answers. I was looking for a reunion. At home, my Bible was no longer hidden. It was next to the bed, marked, scribbled on, with crumpled pages. I was no longer the woman who mocked faith, not even the young woman who cursed God at her mother's funeral, not even the teacher who turned arguments into shields. Now I was Emily, the woman who died and came back with her eyes open. And even without understanding everything, even with 1,000 questions still unanswered, I knew I was on the right path. I hesitated for weeks. Every time I looked at my phone camera, my hands shook. How do I explain something that defies everything I have preached for years? How do I tell the world that the skeptical, cold, intellectual woman had seen Jesus? But the feeling that I needed to speak wouldn't leave me alone. It was like something inside me was burning. A flame, a mission. It wasn't about me. It was about who needed to hear it. So one night, I sat in front of the window of my apartment. Outside, the city was silent, just the distant sounds of cars and sirens. I picked up my phone, I took a deep breath, and I began. My name is Emily Thompson. I'm a college professor in Seattle, and what I'm about to tell you here will sound crazy to many, including me if I were listening to this 2 months ago. I spoke for more than 30 minutes. No script, no cuts. I told him everything. From my childhood in the church, my mother's death, my anger at God, my life as an atheist, the surgery, and the encounter. I described his presence, the light, the forgiveness. I told you about the return, about the crying, about the new beginning. And I finished like this. I don't have all the answers. I'm still in the process. I still make mistakes. I still doubt sometimes. But one thing I know for sure, Jesus is real. I saw it. I felt it. And he loved me even when I denied his existence. I posted the video anonymously. No catchy title. Just, I died, and I came back different. I went to sleep with no expectations. The next day, it already had thousands of views. In the comments, people are sharing similar experiences, others saying they cried watching it, some doubting, of course. But even that gave me peace, because I've been on the other side. I understand. Within a week, the video went viral. I've been called for podcasts, shows, church invitations, but I turned down almost all of them. I didn't want fame. I didn't want stages. I just wanted the message to reach the right hearts. I started responding to messages personally. Some were from grieving mothers. Others were from young people suffering from depression, men who were thinking about taking their own lives. And every time I wrote back, I felt him with me, guiding words, healing through me. My testimony became more than a story. It became a bridge. And me? I was just a messenger, a former atheist, saved by grace. If someone had told me a year ago that I would spend my days sitting next to hospital beds, holding hands with strangers, I would have laughed. Today, it is what gives me life. After my video spread, I started receiving invitations from places I never imagined. Clinics, rehabilitation centers, palliative care wards. They wanted me to speak, not as a teacher, but as someone who died and came back with a message. I accepted some. But it was in the hospital, the same one where I almost died, that I found my place. Every day, I visit terminally ill patients. Some are angry, others are apathetic, and there are those who tremble with fear in the face of death. I don't preach, I don't give sermons, I just sit next to and listen. And when they ask me if I believe in life after death, I look them in the eye and say, I didn't just believe it, I saw it. I've held cold hands in their last minutes. I've heard confessions that never left dark rooms. And I have seen eyes fill with tears of peace when hearing that Jesus is more than an idea. He is a real, living presence who loves without conditions. I became part of a spiritual support group at the hospital. I'm not a chaplain, nor a pastor. About Emily, the one who came back to tell. My life is simple now. I teach part-time, I write, I visit, I pray in silence. But every gesture of mine carries something new, a look, a touch, a true listening. Because I know that everything counts. Everything leaves a mark. Coming back from death wasn't just a miracle for me. It was a door that opened for many. Today I understand that the mission was not to prove anything. It was to love. And if you ask me what I learned from all this, I would say that it doesn't matter how far you think you've gone. No matter how many times you denied, doubted, fell. Jesus never stopped seeing you, and he never stopped waiting for you. I was blind for so many years, and yet he called me back, and now I continue. Thank you for listening to me. I'm Emily, and I'm back to love differently. If you've made it this far, comment, I believe in the light below. I want to know who felt all this with me. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming up. And now, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen. I'll wait for you there.